For whatever reason, and I don't know what it was, I told myself that I had to get to 6 weeks before I could ask for help. I think it was partly because I didn't want to go in and be told that nothing was wrong, because that seemed like the worst possible scenario for me, was to be in this much pain and be basically told it's you.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC. I always have fun with my guests, and for different reasons. With some, I am online friends and have never met in real life. Others I'm meeting for the first time in an offline chat a few minutes before our interview. There are some guests that I've worked with, met their families, helped them with breastfeeding, and I've become personal friends with them. Then there are guests like today. We first met under interesting circumstances. I remember immediately liking her, thinking her chunky baby was gorgeous, and I remember walking away from that meeting with my heart singing. As we get into her story, I hope she doesn't mind sharing how we met. Today we're going to be talking to Morgann, who grew up in Seattle. She married her husband Nathan in August of 2013. They welcomed their first daughter into the world in November of 2014. Not long after, the prospect of a job and an opportunity to pursue a master's degree brought their family to Phoenix, Arizona. Morgann quickly plugged into the birth community here as a birth doula with a local birthing center. Around the same time, she became pregnant with their second daughter, who was recently born on July 31st of this year. Though Morgann is currently taking a break from active doula work, she continues to be involved in the birth community in the Phoenix area. Breastfeeding support is something she is passionate about, as neither of her breastfeeding journeys have been easy. Her hope is that she would be able to offer some sort of encouragement, education, or insight to our podcast listeners today. She enjoys walks in the evening before putting her girls to bed, spending quality time with good friends, and talking about all things related to pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding. I always know that when I get time to spend chatting with another birth junkie, we can sometimes go off on lovely tangents. So Morgann will probably have to reel each other in from time to time.
That's okay.
So welcome to the show, Morgann. I'm happy to be hanging out with you today and for my All About Breastfeeding listeners to get to know you. So I know that you're from Seattle, and I'd love for you to share a little bit about what life was like for you in the early years growing up.
Sure. Yes. I grew up in Seattle. I lived at home with my mom and dad, and I have younger twin brothers. My dad traveled a lot for work. He was gone for weeks at a time and then home and kind of in and out. And my mom was primarily a stay-at-home mom, though she did hold down a few part-time jobs, but her role was always to kind of be home and taking care of us kids first before any of that. Growing up, I was an academic. I loved school and loved the challenge of that sort of thing. But I was also a kind of a jock and lived in both worlds. I played sports year round and all the way through high school graduation, just loved that. At home in particular, like I kind of said before, my dad was a workaholic. And so we grew up in a home that was unstable because of that. He came from a very abusive family growing up. And so he was very hard on us and very strict on us and had really, really high expectations for all of his kids. And so that I think was something I carried with me, is just trying to, make the grades or make the team or whatever it was that was kind of a win in his eyes. And my mom, gosh, her name is Dory, and her nickname was Dory Do-It-All. She just did everything. She was involved in everything, and we lived a very fast-paced, running here, going there, early home, that kind of thing. which looking back was pretty formative for me because that's all I knew. My norm was just to go 110%, 110% of the time.
That's funny because I was going to say if your dad had this high expectation for his kids, I was wondering if your mother balanced that out and if she was softer and gentler and slower.
Yeah,
But it doesn't seem so.
My mom is definitely, she's softer. She's gentle. My mom is my best friend. She's amazing. And she was an incredible parent. Essentially, she did it kind of single-handedly for a lot of our young years. And she rocked it, but man, she rocked it fast. we were all over the place. So
yeah, because when I met her, she seemed to be a pretty Zen kind of personality to me.
She is an amazing, amazing mom, and she has taken very good care of me in these postpartum days. So,
oh, how nice. It's always funny speaking to people of interesting professions. So I'm thinking you probably didn't grow up dreaming of being a doula when you were a little girl.
Oh gosh, no. No, what's interesting, and you might be able to relate, I think it's a common story with birth junkies, is there's always been something in me that's been fascinated by pregnancy, birth, and babies, all of that. I was 2.5 when my brothers were born, and my very first memory is the day that my brothers were born, that something in me knew that this was important. It was big. I don't remember my mom being pregnant with them, but I remember the flavor of the lollipop that the nurse gave me for my big sister gift. And I remember the outfit I was wearing. And I remember all of that. It makes me think that something just knew that this was a big deal. It was a big day. When I was younger, I loved children. I babysat from an early age. One family in particular, I remember her leaving me with her 5 children. And I was 12 years old. I loved it. I ate it up. And as I got older, I became, still fascinated with children and babies, but really fascinated with pregnancy and birth. And I remember being in high school, I took really rigorous courses, and I'd frequently spend my entire Saturday, studying. But my study breaks that I would give myself to pace myself through the day would be watching birth videos on YouTube. And it was kind of one of my silly secrets about who I was, because I just thought I was crazy, and I knew everybody else would think so too.
So you didn't tell anybody?
No. People think you're crazy.
You were holed up sitting watching birth videos on YouTube.
Yeah. And I even remember my favorite show in junior high and high school was TLC's A Baby Story, which now that show would drive me crazy. But then that was kind of all I had. That was the mainstream normal access to birth on TV, basically. And so I watched every episode and, would kind of grasp at whatever I could get my hands on.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because when we're watching TLC, we kind of, it's just reinforcing what we see and hear about birth on many TV shows and in the movies, and everything is an emergency situation. And so that, it sounds like that was your knowledge base about birth.
Absolutely. And to that point, everybody that I knew, I was young, and so it's not like my friends were having babies or anything, but everybody I knew, they all went to the hospital, got the epidural as soon as possible. And that was kind of the refrain that I heard when birth was talked about. It's traumatic, it's awful, and you just want that epidural is kind of your goal, really, in all of it. There's nothing wrong with epidurals, but that was just kind of my birth construct, was this is how it's done. The doctors call the shots and that sort of thing. And
for me, it's not only about the epidural, but it's also about like the last few minutes before the birth. It always, it's often, I should say, depicted as some kind of emergency situation where we have to get this baby out now. And
full of fear.
Like, we're not afraid of noise, but, in the movies, they have this high pitched scream out with the throat constricted and going up and out rather than down and below, the kind of noises that we're looking for. But it's always just like, oh my goodness, we have to get this baby out now. Yes. And it's a big emergency, and then the baby's born, and A, thank goodness everything's okay, or B, it's a race to the ER. right?
Yeah, very full of fear. And now I look back and go, why did I even want any part of that?
Because you were still fascinated by the
I was
birth,
still
right?
just fascinated by the process of it all. And again, I didn't really have a sounding board to talk about those things with. It's not a common topic, especially as a junior or senior in high school. I knew I didn't want to be a nurse, and I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. And so I decided to become a teacher instead. And so I went to school for my degree in education and got that. And it wasn't until partway through I was home for a summer that one of my kind of mentors at church that I had grown up with, she was a doula. And I kind of started Facebook stalking her and was very intrigued by what this might be. And so I struck up a conversation with her one day, and it was just kind of a snowball from there. I talked with her and said, oh my gosh, this is everything I've ever wanted to do and didn't know existed. And so I just kind of jumped on the opportunity for training right after that and started shadowing her and apprenticing with her, and then started taking on my own births, and it was incredible.
That's pretty cool how it happened. So you were probably initially like, what's a doula?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think more than anything, I was thinking, how do I pronounce this? And then quickly realized, especially being in the Seattle area, that my resources for being an aspiring doula were pretty vast in that area. And so I just kind of had to decide who I was going to train through and those sorts of things, what worked with my schedule. But it was such a blessing to finally figure out something. There were people like me out in the world who loved birth as much as I do.
Like so. You found your people, right?
Yes. It only took 20 years, but I did.
Who did you train with as a doula?
I trained through Doula International.
Okay, great. Mm-hmm. I'm interviewing Penny Simkin in a few weeks.
Ooh, I'll have to listen to that.
I'm like so excited.
That's awesome. She's wonderful. So full of wisdom.
She is. And she's never going to remember it, but I met her many years ago, probably 30 years ago in a private home on Long Island, New York, where there was a bunch of us birth junkies. And she was invited. And at that time, she must have been, now that I think about it, it was in her early years, and she must have been doing like small workshops because there were 10 of us.
Oh, goodness.
10 of us in Penny Simkin sitting around from I remember I went there after dinner. It was supposed to end at like 8 or 8:30. And she was sleeping at this guest host's house. And we just went until after midnight, just talking and talking and talking. And it was like the best thing ever.
What you would have to pay to be one of 10 people in a room with Penny Simkin these days.
I know. So of course, even then, I was excited, but I didn't realize who I was in the presence of.
Oh,
and,
man,
we were just going to meet this woman who was starting this organization teaching doulas. That was that. So I'm going to ask you to just close your eyes. Now's when we're going to kind of take a deep breath and kind of settle into talking about breastfeeding. So close your eyes and just kind of put your feet flat on the floor and loosen up your arms. And let's take a breath together in through the nose. And slowly let the air out through your mouth. And just relax your shoulders and jaws and tongue. And just one more deep breath in through the nose. And slowly let the air out, relaxing and relaxing, relaxing as you let the air out. Okay, Morgan, so let's open your eyes.
Okay.
And now we're going to talk breastfeeding. So we talked about Dory Do It All. Did Dory breastfeed too?
She did not. Breastfeeding was very painful with me, her first. And hearing her tell the story now, she said she tried and tried. She wanted to breastfeed so bad and tried hard and saw a lactation consultant and became so engorged because I wasn't removing milk. And she said that the day that she decided to switch to formula with me was because she was holding me in her lap and I was crying out of hunger, and she just couldn't bear the pain of nursing me. And so my dad was standing there and handed me to my dad, and he gave me a bottle. And she said she went and she took a hot bath and milk just poured out of her breasts and filled the tub. And she said she just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. Makes me tear up now thinking about it.
I know.
Sobbed. And because of that experience with me, she didn't even attempt to, breastfeed twins. A couple years later, she just went to formula with them. And so she still feels like she failed. In reality, I think she and I both know now that she just didn't have the resources that she needed to be successful. And anybody in her situation would have surely done the same thing.
Yeah. How sad that she was in pain, and how sad that she felt like like she didn't succeed in it. I always feel bad when moms walk away from their experience with that, because for the most part, everybody tries the hardest they possibly can. And it is, sometimes it's a matter of resource. Sometimes, there are other factors.
Yeah. And at the time, tongue ties weren't a thing. People did not realize, for the most part, that they can impact breastfeeding, let alone, being able to properly diagnose them. And what we know now from my first daughter and the doctor that we went to see with her is that I was tongue tied. I still am. And so it was so neat through my breastfeeding experience that we'll get to later, that there was so much redemption for her, for my mom, in finding out that there was a reason, that she wasn't a wimp, that she, didn't necessarily fail because of her inability to breastfeed, but because of my inability to latch and remove milk properly.
Yeah. And, that's the deal, is that your Ty went undiagnosed. Yes. And she was not able to breastfeed because of it. And it's kind of as black and white as that in her situation. If your tongue just wasn't working well enough to really remove the milk, she's in a lot of pain and you're not getting the milk. And if nobody realizes that's what's going on, then a mother just does the next best thing that she can possibly do to feed her baby.
Absolutely.
And, there was just so much less information about ties all those years. What year were you born? Do you mind saying?
91.
It's not that we didn't know about tongue tie. It's not that physicians didn't know about tongue tie at all, but it was not that commonly known at that time. In the early years, I mean, we can do a whole show on that, but in the early years, in the 30s and 40s, way before formula became popular, the ties were known and ties were taken care of, but it kind of fell out of favor when formula and bottle feeding became primary and people weren't checking for ties. It got lost in medical school. They weren't teaching students about it. So it's not that ties are any different now per se. There's many midwifery textbooks that talk about babies being tied, but then we have a couple of generations where it just went by the wayside. It's sort of the knowledge, and your mom fell in that place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you. Before your first beautiful baby girl was born, I'd love to know, what did you do to prepare for breastfeeding? So women can take classes, you can watch videos, read books, and you also have appointments with prenatal care providers. So what is it that you did to prepare for breastfeeding?
My primary method of preparation was through my midwife and those visits. And we did spend one visit in particular dedicated to kind of the mechanics of breastfeeding and all of that. And then the other thing that I did is, one of my friends who was a nursing mom at the time gave me a book called The Nursing Mother's Companion. I devoured that, and it's really hard to kind of figure it out without actually having a baby. As much as I could, I knew the positions that I was supposed to hold the baby in and my breast in and those sorts of things. And then I did have a couple friends who were breastfeeding moms at the time, and I, had been around them and watched them breastfeed, but none of them had issues early on with breastfeeding at all. And so my general framework of breastfeeding was that you just did it. Baby came out and knew what to do, and I would know what to do because I had read all the materials, and it would just be, a ship set out to sea.
You just pop them on and go, right?
Right.
So looking back, and I know you had struggles and we're going to talk about that, but looking back, what do you feel was most helpful?
That's a good question. I think what was most helpful was my friends who were breastfeeding. Whether or not their journey was easy, I knew that they were nursing moms. And so when my time came, I had those relationships with them And so I had people to talk to and to cry to or to ask questions of, because they had done it and they were there in the flesh and they could come over and, show me or different things like that. A book can't do, a book is only as good as the words on the page, and those are sometimes not enough.
Yeah. And the joke is the baby didn't read the book, right?
Right. Right.
You need what I call your breastfeeding partner in order to start learning how to do this breastfeeding dance with each other.
Yes. And then I'd say, secondly, it was having, for me, my husband that was on the same page as me, that we had talked beforehand and we were both committed to breastfeeding. And so when those hard times came, they were hard for him too, and not just me. And so to feel like we were in it together and we were going to figure it out together, and that if I said I needed to, make an appointment with a lactation consultant, he was on board, would make the call for me or whatever. I think that was invaluable for me.
One of the things we know from surveys and talking to moms just one-on-one is that there are several things that they say the most important for them. And one is the support of their partner. Mm-hmm. The other is supportive friends. If you're around other people who have breastfed, that's huge. And the other big thing is their provider. And their provider to do more than just give lip service and say breastfeeding is important, it's healthy for you, it's healthy for your baby, but to be able to provide breastfeeding support and to be able to provide that emotional support for you. So you definitely had from the husband, you definitely had from friends. And when you were struggling with breastfeeding issues, who was it that you went to primarily? Did you go to your midwife for help first?
In the early days, I did. Yes, I went to my midwife first. She came out to my house one day, and gosh, it was probably only day 2 actually. And by that time, my nipples were already cracked and bleeding, and breastfeeding was so painful. I remember I would scream through each nursing session, get through. And she came out, and I just remember, crying and saying, I can't do this. This is too painful. And I remember her giving me, she's like, you know what, you're doing it. So you can do it, but why don't you block feed? It was her suggestion to feed. I had plenty of milk. So to feed on one side each feeding and alternate sides, because it gave me a longer break for each side in between breastfeeding. And that, I remember that just feeling like hope, like, okay, you've got a plan B. Let's try that. And it did help a little bit. It wasn't enough, but she kind of gave me a couple nuggets of wisdom along the way like that at the time was like just enough hope for a change of plans to get me through. So
now, if your baby was tongue-tied, it sounds like your midwife did not have training to evaluate for that.
Yes, she did not. She was not the one to diagnose. I do remember her checking for a suck reflex and everything with her pinky finger, and that wasn't the issue. My daughter had a very, very, very powerful suck. I remember my midwife commenting on that actually at the birth center after she was born, as she was just kind of doing her newborn exam. But it was, all the mobility that the tongue needs was not there. And so what I ended up contacting my friend who was a doula, the one who I apprenticed with, and said, I don't know what to do. I need resources. But honestly, that wasn't for about 6 weeks out. And I just kind of grit my teeth.
For 6 weeks, are you cracked and bleeding the whole time?
Yes, cracked and bleeding. And this was probably like my rock bottom of nursing with my first. And I got to the same moment that my mom got to, where I had been, my daughter, she would nurse for like 45 minutes to an hour every single time. So my breaks really weren't all that long in between. And I just sobbed through them. And I remember I had just fed her. She kind of like choked on something. My husband was burping her. She choked on spit or something. And she just threw up like her whole feeding. And I just started crying because I knew she was going to be hungry sooner than she was, supposed to be hungry.
That cry that I could relate so well to, that you are in such incredible pain.
Yes.
You're looking at your little baby and they're crying to feed, and you are thinking,
There's no way.
There's no way. I just cannot do this. So you're in such pain. Your baby's crying to feed and you hit that wall, right?
Oh yeah. I was sitting on the couch and my husband, like I said, had been burping her, and gosh, he brought her over to me and she was just sobbing and was so hungry, and I was sobbing and so not ready to feed her. And I just looked at him and I said, I can't do it. And he said, that's fine, but we need to feed her. And so he said, it's okay if we give her a bottle. Do you want me to give her a bottle of formula? We had a can that had like been mailed to us or something while I was pregnant. I looked at him and I said yes. And so he started to walk away and I said, no, I'm going to feed her. And he brought her back to me and I switched to the other side and I fed her. But we had this whole routine where I had a Pandora station that I would listen to get me through about the first 5 minutes. Those were always kind of the most painful until the pain became more of a numb pain versus like a screaming pain.
Right. Once we peeled you off the ceiling.
Basically, yeah. So he came and sat by me and he started the Pandora station. I would get her onto latch. I'd curl my toes under. I'd, do whatever I had to do, and I fed her. It was in that moment for me that, especially as a doula now, that I get it. Like, I understand why moms don't continue to breastfeed. If that is your experience up front, nobody wants to do that multiple times a day for an hour at a time. And it's excruciating. I remember telling my husband, I said, I would rather give birth than do this.
I would say to myself, I can't believe everything was all about the birth. And then I gave birth and that was doable. And now I'm enduring this like high, incredibly high pain and cracked and bleeding nipples and just a horrible experience.
Oh yeah.
And you're doing it, like you said, many times a day. I'm like, this is crazy.
When you're sleep deprived and it's really a recipe for disaster. And so the other thing is that I'm just sort of a stubborn person in general. And at that point I was, I trained as a doula and had helped moms breastfeed to the best that I could, which I'm sure wasn't super helpful having not breastfed, but I kind of did all that. And then because of that and because of my background, people knew, because it was kind of a new thing. I had just completed my training and started taking on my own clients and everything. I somehow told myself this lie that I wasn't allowed to have problems breastfeeding, because this is this is my world. This is what I talk to other moms about and what I've learned and studied. And so for whatever reason, and I don't know what it was, I told myself that I had to get to 6 weeks before I could ask for help. I think it was partly because I didn't want to go in and be told that nothing was wrong, because that seemed like the worst possible scenario for me, was to be in this much pain and be basically told it's you, that there's something wrong with you.
Right, because you just hope that they're going to find something, but it's that personal feeling like, what if they don't? Then
Right. And so I told myself, get to 6 weeks. And if it's so painful at 6 weeks, then I was justified in asking for help, which now I know was like the worst advice that I could have ever given anybody, especially me. I mean, but I did. I made it to 6 weeks somehow, and with lots of tears and lots of pain and nipples that were annihilated by that point. But my daughter was gaining weight. She was a chunky baby and we never had weight gain issues. And so even more so, I told myself it has to be me, because if there's something wrong, then she shouldn't be gaining weight or she shouldn't be sleeping well at night. All these things. So I talked myself out of asking for help. So then the time finally rolled around. It was still painful as ever. I texted my doula friend and said, I need a referral. And she gave me a referral to a lactation consultant, and I scheduled. And it was in that visit that she assured me that there was something wrong. There was a reason for all of this, and that there was a relatively easy fix.
Do you remember on an emotional level how you felt when you heard and got it that it wasn't anything that you were doing?
I cried. out of relief. I remember that whole ride home, my husband went with me. Why did I wait this long? If there's a fix for this, and there is, why did I wait this long? Why? And I remember feeling hopeful for the first time in a long time, feeling like I might be able to actually breastfeed for longer than 6 weeks.
Have you heard that Phoenix, Arizona is blessed with an amazing birthing center? Baby Moon Inn Birth Center is the best option for families who want access to midwifery care in and out of a hospital setting. You can experience birth in a comfortable home-like setting where natural birth is the focus. Laboring in water, being able to walk outside during labor, and enjoy the beautiful garden. This is what birth can be like for you. There is so much more to learn about Baby Moon. The staff would love to have the opportunity to meet you and would like to extend an invitation for you to attend a free Choices in Childbirth class and a tour of the birth center. All you need to do is call 602-314-7755. That's 602-314-7755 and ask for the tour dates. You can also go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. And on the right-hand side of the page, you will see a link that will bring you to the calendar and you can sign up for the tour yourself. When you come in for the tour, make sure that you tell them you found out about it from the All About Breastfeeding podcast, and you will be given a very lovely free gift. Now, back to the show. Were you scared when she told you about tongue tie?
I was. If you Google tongue tie and you read about the procedure, it sounds pretty scary, especially on, a little baby. But at the same time, I thought, if this is what's going to allow me to breastfeed, then I at least have to entertain the idea of it.
Do you remember, did your husband feel the same way?
Absolutely. He was so supportive. And like I said, he kind of just jumped on the train with me. Like he had the attitude of whatever you need is what I need. And I said I needed this. And so he did too.
Sometimes we just skirt over these issues, and we have lots of moms who are listening. They may be pregnant, have not even had their first baby. They may have a baby and wondering what's wrong because they're suffering. Maybe it's tongue tie, maybe it's not. But I think when, in particular, because your issue was tongue tie, I think it's helpful to kind of peel away the layers of that onion just a little bit and talk about, on the one hand, you were like me, you're like stubborn. So you're doing this breastfeeding thing anyway, but it's killing you along the way, and your nipples are cracked and bleeding, and you finally give in, you finally go to someone. And on one hand, you're thrilled to hear that there is a reason, but I also didn't want to ignore a very common reaction that I have with moms is then fear. Like, you're happy that there's a reason, but now we're telling you the fix is to do something, have a procedure for your baby. And then that can be fearful. And sometimes as a couple, sometimes people are not in sync with what to do about it. Some people need to sit on it for a few days. Some people just say, thanks for the information, but I just cannot do this procedure. So I just didn't want to skirt over the fact that it can be very scary, and we do have our fears thinking about possibly getting this procedure. And yet you were on the same page with your husband and you checked it out. Even through your fear, you're still trying to educate yourself.
I do remember being met with some, interesting looks from some family members and friends when I would tell them, because for me, it was like the biggest relief. I was so excited to let people know that there was a fix and I didn't have to do this any longer, and, all of those things. And yet people were just, you're going to do what to your baby's tongue? And I would get a lot of that from some people. But for me, and I guess my encouragement would be to any moms or dads or whoever that are making these decisions is that it does feel a little scary. I was scared, especially going to the appointment and driving there with my daughter. But for me, the relief that I got was immediate. I breastfed her right after the procedure, and it was like, I remember being like, this is what it was supposed to feel like this whole time. this is relaxing and I enjoy my child and I can do this. Like, I mean, if my daughter wants to breastfeed for an hour, I would love to breastfeed her for an hour.
It's interesting to say it's like night and day doesn't even cut it.
No.
Just talk to me for a minute about, so you had a referral to what kind of provider?
So she's kind of a pioneer in her field. Her name is Dr. Marian O'Hara, and she practices out of Seattle, and she owns a clinic called Seattle Breastfeeding Medicine. And all she does is breastfeeding medicine. She's an MD. And she owns this quaint little house in a neighborhood that has been converted to an office. So really all she does is tongue tie releases and then therapy associated with that sort of thing.
Love it.
It's incredible. We walked in and we had a body worker work with my daughter and with me because there was so much tension in my neck and my shoulders and in her jaw and neck and everything from latching incorrectly for 6 weeks. And we met with a lactation consultant before the procedure, and then we had the procedure done, and then we met with a lactation consultant after the procedure to, help us relearn bad habits, basically, that we had formed out of necessity. I mean, the environment for me was so nice to be, it felt so homey. And instead of strapping her down to a board, they swaddled her in this muslin blanket. And it was exactly what I needed as a nervous mom to walk in and be met with, people who were smiling and not scared and, not nervous about anything. I was the most nervous one. And they just assured me that it was going to be okay. And, and that they do this, frequently, and that it was probably going to fix everything.
I love how you describe the whole environment, and it's a whole part of the package, right? And what you looked into, and the people who were there, and just the energy in the room and how you felt, so that by the time your baby is getting this procedure, of course, you're really afraid. It wouldn't be, it would be normal, but it sounds like that helped to bring the nerves down quite a bunch. And you said they swaddled her in a muslin blanket.
Yes.
And was she placed on a table? Were you holding her? Were you in the same room?
I was in the same room. She was actually placed, the room that I was in was set up just like a nursery without a crib. They set her on top of the dresser that was in there. The doctor gave me the option of being in the room or, right by her, or across the room or out of the room, whatever I wanted. And I wanted to be by her. So I stood by her head while she did the procedure. And I watched it all.
What method did she use?
She just clipped it with like surgical scissors. And
so I'm feeling that those nerves, you're standing there and you're watching her go with a sterile scissor under your baby's tongue.
Yes. I tend to do okay in those situations with my kids. Like I don't know, the vitamin K shot doesn't really bother me. I don't like to see them cry, but it doesn't totally stress me out. And more than anything, I just wanted to be near her. And so if it meant that I kind of had to see what was going on, then it was okay. I'm a firm believer that our children, especially our babies who have been inside of us for 9 months, they know when we're stressed and when we're calm and when we're happy and when we're sad. And so I was trying really hard to be calm for her because I really, my head was right by hers. And I think had I been really wound up, she would have been too. And so I talked with her in quiet tones and I sang to her. "You Are My Sunshine" is always my go-to. And so I sang to her and it was a quick thing. And then I remember, this doctor is she's from heaven. We got the procedure was done and everything. And my daughter was pretty hysterical. She was crying and the doctor picked her up, swaddled, and she took over singing "You Are My Sunshine" and shushed her and rocked her and held her in her arms. And that's when I lost it. Was watching this doctor be so compassionate toward my little girl, knowing that it was probably very stressful for me. And she just, to give me a break from being the strong one in that room was so good. My daughter normally kids quiet down pretty quick, but mine did not the first time. And so the doctor said, "Let's go for a walk." And she walked me outside the house and there's a big tree out in the front yard. And she took my daughter over and talk to her like nothing was wrong. Look at the leaves on this tree. Do you see the pretty pink flowers blooming? Let's go for a walk. Do you feel that fresh air on your face? And we walked the sidewalk in front of that house just back and forth until she calmed down. And then she handed her back to me. And then, we saw a lactation consultant to nurse. And so I know that that's not the setting everywhere. And certainly in Phoenix, being outside, for part of the year is not refreshing at all. If there are providers listening that do this procedure from a mom, the single most memorable thing about that whole experience was that provider cared just as much about my daughter as I did in that moment. And it was so evident that she was not rushed, that she had time for me, and that she cared. And for an anxious mom, especially for the first time going through the procedure, that was more than I could have ever imagined.
Yeah, you had a very, very, very different and very special, wonderful, wonderful person. She's a gem, and everything about your experience that is a very difficult thing to go through is nothing. I can't think of improving that experience in any way, shape, or form. You had a whole setup. You had the beautiful home to walk into, the wonderful energy, the smiling, compassionate people. And you had a provider who, like, I think I might misquote you, but that she was just as compassionate to your baby as one who's not her mother could possibly be.
Absolutely.
And recognize that you were strong for the time that you needed to be strong. And then that you did need to let go of some of that energy and have to cry. And yet your baby is crying from having the procedure. So she kind of takes your place as best as someone else can take a mommy's place. And she did her thing, and she sang your song, and she took you for a walk. And, you also had body work done, and you had an IBCLC there. So like everything about, like, I would love to encapsulate your whole experience and replicate it time and time again, because we don't just always have that for so many moms. I have to say that is wonderful, and we could aspire for that and move towards that. That would be fabulous. Even if we're just able to find a provider who's compassionate, do the procedure, who can help mothers fix what's going on with breastfeeding, in this case, tongue tie, and understand that sometimes it actually isn't just a procedure. We have to frequently take care of the mom, and we have to do other work with the baby, but that in the end, with just a little bit more time and a little bit more effort and work, you will get to what sounds like you got to pretty quickly your happy place.
Her environment was probably different than 99% of providers, but you can still be compassionate and kind and soft-spoken and tenderhearted in, a typical office setting. That's just as valuable. So,
yeah, great. So was it pretty soon after that? She nursed really well. Did you go through a period at that point? You probably had to have some nipple healing going on, right?
Yes, I did. I do remember over one weekend, one side, I think it was my right side, was just really torn up. And I did pump on that side for like a 24-hour period just to give it a little break to heal. And that really helped to, still tell my body to make milk and just to give a little more break so that it could heal, and then, put the baby back on the breast. And that kind of routine was all I needed for over one weekend for things to really start, healing well.
So tell me I know one of the things you said to yourself was, why did I wait so long? And that's like, we live in the world of coulda, woulda, shoulda sometimes.
Right.
What I want to know is, like, on an emotional level and physical level, once you found your groove and you weren't in any more pain and you were enjoying breastfeeding, what are some of the things you told yourself about your experience?
I remember feeling strong. After I knew what breastfeeding was supposed to be like, I remember even now I look back and go, how did I do that? That was awful. But for me to feel like we accomplished something, that we got over this huge hurdle and we're able to continue nursing, that felt so good as a mom to feel empowered in that. I remember finally feeling like I wasn't broken. I think I spent a lot of those first couple months feeling like something was wrong with me, that this should be easy somehow. And it wasn't. And so to come to a place where we had hit our stride and we had kind of learned the dance with each other the way that it was supposed to be done, I remember just feeling like I was okay,
Sounds like you got to a point where, to me, that's where the fun and the enjoyment and the convenience really is.
Oh, I love
baby
nursing.
and a boob, and you just go wherever you want to go.
I loved it. I loved nursing, especially once they start becoming a little more interactive and they look up at you and they smile with their big eyes and their milk dribbles out of the side of their mouth because they break their latch with a smile.
And they're sticking their finger up your nose, playing with you, right?
Yes. Oh, I loved that.
So you're really building this whole nursing relationship with the baby, right?
Yes.
That's really, really cool. Well, thank you for sharing all that in such detail. I think sometimes we just tend to skirt over these things, which sends another message to mothers who are struggling. They're thinking, well, it must be me because she had this thing, she got it fixed, and she was good to go. And then we forget there's all these emotions that go along with it. And these things take time and we have to grow into it. And it's always evolving and changing. And the wonderful beginning of your breastfeeding was really after you had the procedure. And things could start to calm down. And then you got to the beauty and convenience of breastfeeding your babe.
Yes. And it is beauty and it is very convenient.
And I bet you it was, life was like a lot nicer in your household too. And your husband was happier because you were happier, right? So it affects the guys too. It affects the too, right?
Absolutely. And because things were off, before the procedure, nursing would take so long because she was having to, work so hard and so we all of a sudden went from nursing for 40 minutes to 60 minutes to nursing, down to 20 and then down to 15 and then closer to 10. And even that just drastically affected our family day because I wasn't spending half of our waking hours breastfeeding a baby.
Yeah, it was like totally a whole new world.
Yes.
Oh, it's so interesting. I mean, one of the other things is you just had this bang up supply. So that's a major reason why she did so great weight wise. And then with this really great supply, she becomes more efficient with her tongue and voila. These nursings. It's interesting too, because now you have these breastfeedings that are like so much more joyful and comfortable. Yes. Like, boom, she's done in 10 minutes. And you're like, wait a minute, you could have stayed there a while longer. I would have been happy.
Yes.
This is another one of those interviews where we just had so much fun and we had so much to talk about. We just couldn't get it done in an hour. So please check back in with us for next week for episode number 99 for the second half of this interview with Morgann, as she talks about how having a second baby who was also tongue-tied, how that affected her life postpartum. While she was more knowledgeable about babies who were tongue-tied, this breastfeeding experience had its own early struggles, and she shares this with us in part 2. We also learn about her work as a doula and how she feels about staying home with her kids during this newly postpartum period. And just in case you don't know this piece of information, I do have a Facebook group that I invite you to join. All you need to do is go to Facebook and search for these 4 words, All About Breastfeeding Community. And then you just click on the Join button. This week we had a few interesting conversations going on, and I always think it's fun to see what others have to say on the various subjects. One of the conversations really interested me. With so many moms learning of their own baby's tongue-tie, and with the focus of Morgann's interview being on her baby that was tongue-tied, there's a lot of research that parents can do to find out about tongue-tie and the procedure. And through their research about their baby's ties, this is also leading some moms to question their own health issues and other family members' health issues and wonder if they too could be tongue-tied. I posted a few links where you can learn more about this subject and see videos of adults who are tongue-tied and hear them talk about their experience. Once you watch these videos, you will see why, honestly, I still cry every time I watch a few of these videos. I would love to have you join in the All About Breastfeeding Facebook community so you can join in on this conversation. Until the next show, which is part 2 of Morgann's interview, bye-bye.